Welcome to Pure Nonfiction. I'm your host, Tom Powers. We're coming to you from the Toronto International Film Festival, known as TIFF, where I serve as the documentary programmer. We're listening to music from the film I Am Not Your Negro by Raoul Peck that made its world premiere at TIFF. It's been a favorite among festival goers. Today, Magnolia Pictures announced a distribution deal with plans to make it eligible for this year's Oscars. Peck creates a film essay from the writing of James Baldwin, who died in 1987. Baldwin was renowned for both novels and nonfiction, including his books Notes of a Native Son and The Fire Next Time. Peck draws upon a range of Baldwin's work, including an unfinished book about the lives and deaths of three civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers. The film connects their legacy to our times. Raoul Peck grew up in Haiti and Congo. He went to school in New York, Paris, and Berlin. In 1990, he directed a documentary about the Congolese leader Patrice Lumumba. And in 2000, he had a breakthrough with his fiction film, Lumumba. His other fiction films include Sometimes in April, set in Rwanda, and Murder in Picot, set in Haiti. I interviewed Peck on September 13th as the keynote conversation at TIFF Doc Conference, recorded before a live audience. I asked how he's maintained his independence as a filmmaker.
I did not set out to become a filmmaker. For me, images, film were something you do on the side. My father had a photo camera, he had a Super 8 camera. I used to play with it, use it, but it was not something coming from Haiti, a poor country, and for many other reasons that did not sound serious, to go into the movie business.
It still doesn't, by the way, no matter where you come from.
Yes. And then I didn't have a lot of example to follow. So I studied 7 years industrial engineering, and I became an economist and an engineer, and that was supposed to be my profession. Everything else, writing, photos, was something you do on the side. And until I was doing so much on the side, politics, I was very involved in many groups, and also in film, documentary, fiction. A lot of my friends were filmmakers. And I decided to not to work in my field, or let's say to work differently. And so I decided to go back to film school for another 4 years. And I was much older, I was 26, so I knew enough of life so that this decision was really clear-eyed. So I knew that why I was going to study film. And film was never about telling stories or being an artist. It was always from the get-go as an engagement, as a way to fight, as a way to open doors. It was an instrument, never a means for itself.
I wonder if you can tell me when you came to Baldwin's writing and what it meant to you.
Well, as a little boy, like many other black little boy like me, if you were interested in literature, in film, we would always come to a point where we felt that this book, this film, were not telling our story. It did not represent what we were living in our everyday life. And at the time, there were not many authors that you could look up to. And as far as my life, well, I had Baldwin, Aimé Césaire, and Frantz Fanon, basically. But I started reading Baldwin when I was 16. And it made a big change. It really gave me the legitimacy of thinking, of accepting who I was. And he allows me to decipher the world around me. And in a very poetic way, real way, because he's at the same time a great, I would say, theorist and rhetoric. And at the same time, it's about your
theorist, not terrorist.
Yeah, terrorist. Sorry. These days, dangerous to misspell that. And at the same time, it was about your daily life. You know, how do you watch film? How do you interact in a civil situation every day of your life? So for a very long time, I felt like I grew up with Baldwin, and when I was in my 20s, I realized that I was saying a lot of things that were in fact Baldwin's. For me, he was always part of my life. It's a kind of person, and I say person, but because it was not just his book.
In that you were kind of watching how he conducted himself in public? Is that what you mean?
Of course. And he was, don't forget, in the 60s, 70s, he was probably the only black artist and intellectual that you would see, as you see in the film, almost an hour in Dick Cavett's show, in a time where there was only 3 television network. Time magazine cover, etc., etc. He was almost a poster boy.
So I want to dig a little deeper, and I'm curious, like, were there specific texts? Were you reading all of Baldwin? Were you more towards his essays or his novels? Was there one that really stood out to you?
Personally, I always found of his essays. But the first book that blew up everything, that was The Fire Next Time. And that's the book, I must have given it like 500 times to friends and young people I met. It's like
his publisher thanks you.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I should be part of the company by now. So it's a small book, and it's really very personal and intimate, and it's really it opens the door for all the rest of Baldwin. And I think when you start with this book, you basically try to read everything that he's written.
So tell me about how this project came about, this film project.
I was still living in the States, and I was looking for my next project. It was after, I think, sometimes in April with HBO. And I asked my dear lawyer and friend, Nina Shaw, about what is with Baldwin's right. Do you think I could maybe try to get an option about one of the book? And
you were thinking about adapting one of his books.
It was unclear. I just knew that I have to go back to Baldwin and do something. And it was also a time where Baldwin had totally disappeared. So Nina at first said, well, forget it. And then, yes, we did write a letter. And we had a response within 3 days. And they asked me if I would be willing to come to Washington and meet them. And I went there, and I met the person who opened the door to me was Gloria Carifa-Smart, James Baldwin's sister. Mm-hmm. And it was like I was coming back to a family, to my family. Mm. And she had seen my film, she had seen Lumumba, and for her, Lumumba was a very important film. So, and that opened all the doors for me. Once I had the rights, like on everything Baldwin ever wrote, books, letters, essays, fictions, speeches, etc. So I had a huge responsibility. I knew I could not just make a film on Baldwin. And I knew it would be a unique film and the only film probably. So it took me time to find the right entry to the subject, the right, I knew the film even formally had to be different. I knew that I didn't want to interpret Baldwin. I wanted Baldwin center stage. His words should be center stage. No talking heads in the film. So to do that, I really needed something. And 4 years after that, Gloria gave me a letter and a bunch of notes. And it was a letter that you see in the beginning, a letter to his literary agent, telling him that he wants to write a book about three of his friends, and that the book was about America, and like an ultimate book on America. And of course, he never wrote that book. He never got to write it. And then for me, that was the moment. I said, well, I think he did write it, but it's in all his book, in all his body of work. And I just had to search for it and put it together.
Here's a clip from I Am Not Your Negro.
To J. Acton, Spartan Literary Agency, June 30th, 1979. My dear Jay, I'll confess to you that I am writing the enclosed proposal in a somewhat divided frame of mind. The summer has scarcely begun, and I feel already that it's almost over. And I will be 55. Yes, 55 in a month. I am about to undertake the journey. And this is a journey, to tell you the truth, which I always knew that I would have to make, but had hoped, perhaps, certainly hadn't hoped, not to have to make so soon.
Picking a voice for James Baldwin is a key element to this film. Can you tell me about how you found that voice for Baldwin?
I know most of my film have voiceover, and I learned that more than just somebody that have a great voice or is well known, what you really need is that the voice can create a character, totally independent, who has his own soul, his own feelings. And so I needed somebody who not only represented something, but also who could delve inside that character and create it. And I had a list of 6 to 8 well-known actors, black actors, and the criteria were diverse, and also one of them was somehow your credibility as a human being and what you meant to the population at large and what you represent. And Samuel Jackson came on top of that list very early on, and he's the first one we approached, and also through my lawyer Nina Shaw, and he accepted it very quickly, and he read the text, he saw the edit that we had at the time, and we set up a time for the recording, and I didn't have any particular direction to him besides telling him, whatever you say, it has to come from the inside. You are the text, you are Baldwin. So work with it as you would do for any role on stage. You know, actors on stage know how to work that. They have a text and they really play with the text until they own it. And this is what we needed for this voice.
There's two, in my mind, prominent pieces of archival with Baldwin speaking. One is the Dick Cavett conversation. I think the other one is also from 1968, a conversation with Kenneth Clark. Was there more that you could have drawn from, or was it a pretty limited selection of filmed interviews with Baldwin that existed?
No, there are hours. And the Dick Cavett show itself is a document.
Mr. Baldwin, I'm sure you still meet the remark that, what are the Negroes, why aren't they optimistic? They say, but it's getting so much better. There are Negro mayors, there's Negroes in all of sports, there are Negroes in politics, they're even accorded the ultimate accolade of being in television commercials now. And, I'm glad you're smiling. Is it at once getting much better and still hopeless?
Well, I don't think there's much hope for it, to tell you the truth. As long as people are using this peculiar language. It's not a question of what happens to the Negro here, or to the black man here. That's a very vivid question for me, But the real question is what's going to happen to this country. I have to repeat that.
Because in it, it's everything. It's the system, it's Baldwin, is how the public saw Baldwin or somebody like Baldwin, and it tells a whole story. It's 45 minutes long. The most difficult part was to know what to take, what to keep, so that I did not shape the film only through those footage. I knew they were really valuable, but on the other hand, I'm making a film, and the film has to have its own identity. So there are many films with Baldwin, and that's why a lot of time I put those credits to this film, because for me they are important films as well, and they are complementary to that. But this should stay as Baldwin own voice, own point of view, and I try to be as faithful as possible to who he was and to what did matter to him. And so it was for me, it was a condensed Baldwin, and that will enables you to go everywhere in his work. And I hope the film will do that. It is just a beginning, and to go back to Baldwin, because you need to know Baldwin today, especially.
Given that Peck's work has an international range, I asked why he wanted to focus now on the United States.
This particular film, it's about my youth here. Also, those images, when for me, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy, they are in the kitchen of where I live, in my uncle's house in Brooklyn. There was this, those velvet rugs on the wall that you could buy in every street corner. That's part of my youth, and I remember looking at that thing on the wall and something was wrong with it for me. It was like a mythological picture, and so those things revisiting. The film is revisiting all these Tarzan. Stagecoach, John Ford, John Wayne, Doris Day, those are the images of my youth that frame me as well. So this film is also something like a memoir. And the fact that I wanted this film totally embedded in the US, it's because it will have also a greater impact toward the rest of the world. Because it gives it legitimacy here. And although I think the film is as important for European, for France, for the UK, for all, because all those countries also have similar problem, although they don't want to acknowledge it, but they have similar problems.
Something your film reminded me is how much Baldwin loved movies and how much he was involved in movies that really never got made by and large. He describes on the day that Martin Luther King was killed in 1968 that he was in the middle of writing a screenplay about Malcolm X, where he hoped that Billy D. Williams would play Malcolm X. When you think about the projects that the film projects that Baldwin was involved with, what do you take away from all these unfulfilled dreams?
It's very difficult to say, because he was at the time where, again, he was one of the most famous writer, black or white, and he wanted to do so much, and without having really the infrastructure for it. He wanted to write plays. He wrote a few plays. He wanted to write screenplays. And I read, I think it's published, the Malcolm X screenplay. But of course, it's unfilmable. It's like it would cost $500 million. He has in 3 lines, there are just one setup where you see a lot of birds and flies, and that would cost $1 million just to do that. But again, I like the poetry of the way he wrote that screenplay, and today you would do probably 3 seasons on Malcolm X with that, which is the ambition he had. To those people were so important that they should have that much screen time. And but at the same time, it was almost too early. I mean, today Baldwin would have agent, manager, companies, everything. You know, like a lot of today's the rappers. They are in fashion. They are in record. They are in this, and this business takes a big part of that. And at the time, Baldwin did not have that kind of infrastructure and demand. So, but those a lot of that work are, for me, sometimes incomplete, of course, but they are important because he touches each time the basis of very important subjects. He was like the first one to open your eyes to those projects.
I feel like in the last 30 years, we've seen these moments of attention to Black cinema. In the 1980s, you had Spike Lee and John Singleton in that movement. 20 years ago, Cameron Bailey here at the festival created the Planet Africa section that ran for 10 years that was really looking to make international connections. And, and I do think that the vision of Cameron, who once was my colleague before, now he's my boss, and take this credit for what it is, but I do think that Cameron's vision in shaping that 20 years ago, you see some of those hopes that were laid starting to pay off today. I mean, at this year's festival, there's more great examples of Black cinema than I can think of at any other international festival in my experience. But we also know that sometimes these things are trends that rise and fall. Now that we see like a little bit of momentum happening right now, where does that energy need to go?
It's a difficult question. I can try to answer it differently. First of all, I don't believe in those momentums. I've seen too many of them all my life, all my professional life. In fact, I may say that I'm one of the few in my generation who survived. I know a lot of good friends who had film in Cannes, who won prizes in Cannes, who today cannot find money to make their films. My elders, people who I look up to, because they were the only one I could watch as example of what I wanted to do. People like Charles Burnett, like Haile Gerima, like Billy Woodbury, all those people, Haile is still trying to make his film. Charles Burnett is still trying to make films. And so, and I've seen others who came after them, who again made 2-3 films, or women, people like Julie Dash, all those great women who disappeared at some point and who are struggling to make their film. And those were important people for cinema. There are somebody like Carl Franklin. I remember the One False Move. When I saw this movie, I was blown away. And for me, I said, wow, he made it. He's going to be the next Spielberg. Did not happen. And he made some film, and he's still working, I think. He's doing a lot of television series. But those people, they should have a pile of money and choose whatever project they want to make. And so to answer your question is, I don't know what the way will be or how we will get that. First of all, I think we will never get it from the industry. The industry will never say, here, do it, unless we take it. And the result for me is to be able to be in a room with an executive to whom I pitch my project. I have half an hour, and where I don't need to spend 25 minutes of that half an hour to explain who James Baldwin is and why he is important. For me, that's the result we want to have. Whether you are a woman, whether you are gay, whether you are an Asian, we should be able to enter a room with somebody who knows where we come from, who knows our history. And and where we can then have a discussion about film, about the process of making this particular film, and with what means you want to do it, for what audience, etc., to talk film, and not to have to convince that you exist.
I want to thank Raoul Peck for talking to me at TIFF Doc Conference. On our next episode, we hear another conversation from Doc Conference with the director Nanette Burstein. Her new film is Gringo, The Dangerous Life of John McAfee, about the computer antivirus inventor who created an armed compound in Belize and has been accused of several crimes. Nanette talked to me about interviewing a Belize gangster.
I did try to, be as tough as I could without having him suddenly attack me across the room or anything. And he did come armed every time.
He came armed.
He was packing, yeah.
So that's of concern.
Like we go to put the mic in him and it's like, oh, can you just move your handgun over? And there's like one in his sock too. You're like, okay.
Did you have bodyguards with you?
Not then, no. That would have been a good time, but.
Look out for that conversation next Thursday. I want to thank TIFF Documentary Program Associate Dorota Leck for helping to organize Doc Conference. Pure Nonfiction is distributed by the TIFF Podcast Network. Thanks to our team, series producer Michael Scotty Jr., sound mixer Kyle Murphy, web designer Cross Strategy, marketing coordinator Sarah Moto, social media handlers Jordan Smith, Alana Schreiber, and executive producer Rafaela Nehausen. I'm Tom Powers. You can follow me on Twitter at THOMPowers. If you like what you've heard, the best way to support us is to subscribe for free on iTunes. And please spread the word to your friends. You can read our show notes, learn about live events, and sign up for our newsletter at purenonfiction.net.